When I see pork shoulder on offer at £2.50 a kilogram, I can't help myself. I've got to grab one to throw on the barbecue and probably a few extras to throw in the freezer. It's a great excuse to do a bit of experimentation. It's a low-cost way to try out new techniques, flavours and dishes. So let's give it a go. So I'm going to turn this 2.2 kilogram pork shoulder into some pulled pork. I make pulled pork all the time, but I'm going to try out a slightly different method this time. But first things first, I need a very sharp knife. This is because I'm going to remove the skin from the top of the pork shoulder. It's a bit of a tricky job and a lot easier with a very sharp knife. Now, I bought this pork shoulder on a bit of a whim, so it's a little bit later in the day than I would normally like to start my pork shoulders. So instead of going low and slow, I'm going to go hot and fast. And that just means cooking it at 150 degrees Celsius rather than 120 degrees Celsius, and this should roughly half the cooking time. Now, I have done hot and fast pulled pork plenty of times before, so I know very well that it works, but what I've never done before is hot and fast mixed with the no wrap method, which I'll explain as we go. First of all, I need to get this skin off. Now, I want to leave as much of the fat cap on as possible while removing that thin layer of skin at the top. Don't worry about being too neat, it's all going to get mushed up anyway. And with that off, you've got a nice bit of skin that you could use for crackling, or what I'm going to do is actually cook it in a pot next to the pulled pork, render out all that fat, and then use it to pour over the pork at the end. I'm now using the existing strings that came with it to just keep it in shape and keep that fat that's loose at the end attached to the joint. And then it's time to rub. I'm going to go a little bit different than I usually do this time. I'm going to put salt, pepper, garlic on as a base. And this is a good time to point out what you're looking for when you're selecting a pork shoulder. So really you want as much of that marbling of fat throughout the meat as you can find. Some pork shoulders can be very lean and they'll be no good for pulling at all. And with the salt, pepper, garlic on, I just want to give it a bit of colour, so I'm just going to use some smoked paprika. But just have a play around. So with that fully rubbed, it's ready to go on the barbecue. I'm just going to monitor the internal temperature using my Ninja ProCook internal thermometer. And this will just keep an eye on the internal temperature for me and let me know when it's ready to come off. Normally you'd pull it off at 75 degrees to wrap it, but I'm going no wrap, so I'm going to leave it on until it's done. I'm going to do this cook today on my Kamado, so I'm going to fill up a full basket with Big K restaurant grade charcoal, which will be more than enough for this cook because these things burn really efficiently. I start it off by burning a couple of wood wool firelighters and leaving them for 10 minutes to burn down. And once they're burnt down, I put in my deflector plate and my grill. And then it's going to take about 15-20 minutes to come up to temperature. I close the lid and leave the top vent and the bottom vent completely open to allow airflow to go in until it gets to 150 degrees Celsius. Once it's there, I can start shutting it down a bit, so I leave the top vents open very slightly, and on the bottom vents I leave about a finger's width, and this should hold it nicely at 150 degrees. Obviously you don't need to do this on a Kamado, you can do it with any lidded barbecue, just set it up for an indirect cook at 150 degrees Celsius. Once I'm happy the temperature is stable, I put the pork shoulder into the middle of the grill, and then also put on a little tray holding that pork rind, which is going to render down and give me some nice fat to pour over. I set up my thermometer to let me know when the internal temperature of the meat reaches 95 degrees Celsius, and sit back and wait for the alert. Now I'm confident the hot and fast method will work fine and will speed up this whole cooking time. But the real experiment I'm doing here is mixing it with no wrap. I know not wrapping it will give it a really nice bark, I'm just hoping that it won't allow it to dry out too much. Once the app tells me that we're at 97 degrees, it's time to check it. Always remember to give your Kamado a little burp before you open it. And this pork shoulder is looking beautiful. It's got an amazing bark, it's taken on an absolutely amazing colour. I'm just going to get my second opinion from the probe, which confirms to me that it is the right internal temperature, but also allows me to feel any resistance. And this thing is probing like I'm dipping it into butter, so I know it's ready to pull off. So from putting this pork on the barbecue to pulling it off took almost exactly 4 hours. Now I think if I had wrapped it, I probably shaved about half an hour off that time. The tray of pork rinds that I had going alongside it has all rendered down very nicely, and it's going to give me some lovely fat to be able to pour over my pork shoulder. Fat content in a pork shoulder is so important for pulled pork. If you've ever had pulled pork that's really dry, it usually just means there's not enough fat in it. Now this pork shoulder is looking absolutely delicious and I just want to tuck right into it, but we are not quite done yet. The next step is arguably the most important, and that is resting the meat. To do this, you want to wrap your meat in tin foil or just cover a lid of a tray like I have, and then place it in a cool box. This is going to allow the meat to stay at a nice temperature and continue cooking, and makes the world of difference to the finished product. I'm just adding a tea towel over the top to give an extra layer of insulation, and I'm going to let this shoulder rest for at least an hour. An hour really is the absolute minimum you want to rest for, the longer the better. But at the same time, a man's got to eat, so after my hour's up, I pull this out. And now we get to find out if I have absolutely nailed it or completely messed it up, and we'll be having baked beans for dinner. So when it comes to pulling pork, like many things in life, it is best to use your hand. But it's very hot and I have sensitive fingers, so I'm going to use these cotton glove liners underneath my latex gloves to be able to pull it without feeling all that heat. Remember to take out that butcher's twine, because you don't want a mouthful of string in your pulled pork. And then it is time to pull. There is no better way than just getting your hands right stuck in there and just pulling the thing apart, and if you've cooked it properly, it should just fall apart nicely. If you've managed to leave a nice fat cap on like I have here, then make sure that you incorporate all that fat into the beef. Beef? No, it's not beef, it's pork. I may have had a glass of wine before doing this voiceover. Just get stuck in and rip it apart. Now, it is at this point where you can really assess how well you've done. And this pulled pork has an excellent smoke ring, some great colour to it. However, if I'm totally honest, it is a touch on the dry side. But I'm sure we can do something to fix that. I'm going to toast myself up some brioche buns to have a nice pulled pork roll. And as the pork is a little dry, I'm going to do everything I can to make it have a better mouthfeel. So I'm going to butter up my rolls, because the more fat I can introduce to this thing, the better. A little bit of salad, because I'm a healthy man. And then load up with that delicious yet slightly dry pulled pork. Now, there are a few different things you can do to save a slightly dry pulled pork, and I'm going to add barbecue sauce. The richness and acidity is going to cut through the fattiness of the pork, and it really brings a slightly dry pulled pork completely back to life. So, should you do hot and fast pulled pork with the no wrap method? Well, honestly, no, I don't think you should. I think you should probably wrap it. This was a little bit of a fail, but not a total fail. I've got myself a nice barbecue pulled pork sandwich, and I have even bigger plans for the leftovers. I really encourage you to go out there and experiment with some cheap pork shoulder. If you're just getting used to a barbecue, or you just want to try a few new things out, it's a really good, inexpensive way to experiment in barbecue. A cheap pork shoulder and probably a cheap supermarket chicken should be the first couple of things that you cook on a barbecue and play around with. They'll help you get used to your barbecue and how it works. And if you want to know how to take cheap, not very good pulled pork but turn it into the best pulled pork you've ever had in your life, then check out my video next week where I make these insane pulled pork pit beans. So go out, grab yourself a nice cheap pork shoulder, but before you do, remember to hit subscribe. Right, I'm going to go and have another glass of wine.